Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Positive Leadership Movement. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and in this episode, you're going to discover how to deliver negative feedback as a positive leader. This may sound a little counterintuitive, huh? Hey, if I'm a positive leader, should I be giving negative feedback? Well, the answer to that is sure. It's inevitable. People aren't perfect and projects get off track. As a leader, we both know it's up to you to course correct and keep everyone moving forward. And contrary to what some people believe about positive leadership, that it's all smiles, rainbows, and unicorns, positive leaders absolutely have to deliver negative feedback so they can elevate teams to new levels of excellence. But how do you do this? I mean, I don't know about you, but I've certainly worked for bosses and I've seen it in the organizations I work with where the standard delivery of negative feedback is to A, yell at people to let them know what a bad job they're doing. No kidding. I mean, really, I've seen cultures where it was considered normal for employees to be crying in the copy room because the leaders were so prone to blasting their people for even minor infractions. So that's option A. You just yell at people. Option B, be passive aggressive about it and maybe make offhand comments in meetings to embarrass the person. Or maybe option C, bring the person into an office, sit them down, and go through everything they did wrong and how they need to pull their socks up or else. We've all seen this, right? And maybe we've been subject to it as well. The problem with these conventional approaches is that it usually adversely affects the relationship between a leader and an employee, and possibly even a whole team, depending on how the situation is handled. So if we're positive leaders, and as we discussed in episode 4, right, being a positive leader means cultivating a positive climate where gratitude, compassion, and forgiveness are part of the organizational culture, then how do we deliver negative feedback in a way that gets your point across, but also avoids the awkwardness and potentially confrontational situation? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. And before I get into the nitty-gritty here, I just want to underscore what a positive leader is. A positive leader is focused on the good and what's going well. And a positive leader is striving for extraordinary levels of excellence. As such, it's imperative that as a positive leader, you do deliver negative feedback as necessary. Otherwise, how can your teams grow and become better at what they do, right? If people aren't doing their jobs effectively, if you don't do anything about that, then how can we ever elevate to those higher levels of excellence, right? Now, the other aspect of all of this is to keep in mind that positive relationships and positive energy are crucial elements of creating a positive workplace culture. And if you didn't already check out those episodes, be sure to listen to episode 6 for the power of positive relationships and episode 3 about the untapped resource of positive energy. So just as a quick recap, because of course you're in this episode and we want to understand these concepts right now, positive relationships and the positive energy that is part of those relationships is the bedrock of your organization. Why? Because as we always say on this podcast, organizations are made up of people, and people need to interact. The better they get along, the more efficient and productive they're going to be. That's the bottom line. In fact, the research shows that people who have positive quality relationships in their lives are significantly more likely to have better physical, emotional, and mental health. And specifically in the workplace, people with quality relationships at work are more resilient and they're better able to recover from setbacks. They're more committed to the organization and more likely to go above and beyond their basic duties to help others. They're more creative in their work and they're more engaged. All that to say and make the point that positive relationships really matter. And so as we delve into this, as it were, sticky wicket of delivering negative feedback, we have to remember that we want to maintain and even build positive relationships in the process. Okay. Does that make it sound even harder to deliver negative feedback? Yeah, it kind of does, right? Okay. But don't worry, it doesn't have to be. Because here's what the research shows. And by the way, if you want to read up on this and dive even deeper, just grab Kim Cameron's book, Practicing Positive Leadership, where he has a whole chapter devoted to this topic. Kim is one of the leading researchers in this field, and his work is simply terrific. All right, so the key to delivering negative feedback as a positive leader is to use what is called supportive communication. Now, we touched on this a little in episode 6, and we really didn't have time to dig too deeply on it, but now we can. So let's review this since there are 5 elements to this technique, okay? So number 1, the positive to negative ratio, okay? Now, think about this for a minute. Have you ever given a presentation, and let's say, just for simplicity, there were 100 people in the room. If 99 of them said you did a great job and one person complained and didn't like it, what would you focus on? Chances are you'll probably ruminate over the negative feedback from that single person who represented just 1% of your audience. And that's because as humans, we experience and remember the negative much more clearly and potently than we do the positive. We tend to gloss over the positive because, hey, it's positive, like, is it really giving me important information? But the negative, oh, now that's a whole different story. We really do have to pay attention because it's giving us very important information, because essentially we're hardwired to emphasize and spend time on the negative way more than positive, right? And of course, this goes back to our caveman days, right? This is evolutionary, it's adaptive. We do need this because obviously if you were, living in the Serengeti and you're scanning the horizon, you are going to pay way more attention to that lion out there than you are to that beautiful tree or that beautiful mountain, right? So we're hardwired for this. So when you're going to give negative feedback, you've got to remember this and keep it in mind. And that's why in supportive communication, the rule of thumb is to deliver 3 to 5 positive statements for every 1 negative statement. And the reason we do this is because you'll keep the situation more focused and even keel rather than having the person you're talking to spiral downwards or have some kind of meltdown over how bad they are at everything, right? Because again, think about it. 100 people in the room, you present, 99 love it, 1 person hates it. What are you focused on? That 1 person, that 1%. So imagine that in a one-on-one situation where you are now delivering negative feedback. You've got to think about that positive to negative relationship, a ratio, and really be mindful that it's not tilting in the negative direction, because what are they going to ruminate on? And what does that do also? It destroys confidence, right? When we just get negative feedback, it destroys our confidence. So yes, you want to course correct, but you don't want to go so far as to actually demoralize the person that you're talking to or make them hostile or defensive, right? Like that's not going to help anybody, not you, not them, not the team, not the organization. So part 1, remember your positive to negative ratio, 3 to 5 positive statements for every 1 negative statement. And it's also a really simple technique. It's interesting. Toastmasters, if you ever go to that organization, they help people who have fear of public speaking feel better about their speaking and give them opportunity to speak. And after somebody speaks, people evaluate it. And they teach this system of, it's a sandwich evaluation where you give positive feedback, then you share the negative, and then you finish with positive. So you sandwich the negative in between. So you can use that in this situation too. So let's say you have 5 positive things you're going to say, say 2, give the negative, and say the other 3, right? Sandwich that negative in between so that person isn't leaving on the down, right? You're not finishing on the down, you're finishing on the up. All right, that's number 1. Number 2 is to be congruent in your communication. And what this really means is that what you're saying matches up with your facial expression and your actions, and that you're being honest and open. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? This doesn't mean that you just go right ahead and express whatever you're feeling and blow a gasket if you're super frustrated. What it does mean is that you need to deliver your feedback directly and honestly without triggering the other person into that place of defensiveness or being offended. Easier said than done? Yeah, for sure, which is where the next few steps come in really handy and help you to do this. Okay, so step number 3, and this is arguably the most important one. Your communication needs to describe what happened and not place judgment on it, right? So it needs to be factual. Now, this one may seem a little obtuse, so let me give you a specific example to illustrate what this one is all about. Okay, so let's say David, who works on your team, delivered a report that was subpar and it was late. Basically, he didn't do a good job. And you need to communicate this to him so he does it better next time. If we're judging what had happened or evaluating it, we might say something like this: David, this is not acceptable. I mean, the report was wrong, and frankly, I don't know what you're doing. Like, are you even competent at writing these reports? This is a disaster. John's meeting is first thing in the morning, and you screwed up the report he needs. I don't know what we're going to do. Now, you certainly were direct in the delivery, and you were honest, but how do you think David's going to react to that? Probably not so well, right? He's probably going to go on the defensive, or he's going to feel totally worthless, because basically we just passed judgment on who David is as a person. We questioned his competence. We wondered if he could even do this. And so we're essentially passing judgment on who he is. However, let's play this scenario a little differently using what's called a descriptive approach, right? Where you're focusing on the facts of what actually happens. It's an objective view, right? So it might have gone something like this: David, this report was late and there were errors in it. Now, you have simply stated the facts there. There is no judgment there. Those are just the facts. And then maybe you say something like this: this means we're all going to have to stay late to fix it, so John has it for his meeting first thing tomorrow morning. So those again are the facts, right? Just stated as so, right? Next part is suggest a solution so everyone can move forward. For example, why don't you start working on the first part and update that now while I reach out to John and tell him we're running behind schedule, but we're working to get the report to him in time for the meeting. And next time, how about we do a review of the reports like this the day before they're due, so it gives us both a little more time. Okay, now I ran through all of that pretty quickly, so let's just review the elements of what I described there and delivering the feedback in a descriptive and non-judgmental way. So the first part is describe what happened, just the facts. And for that I said, David, the report was late and there were errors in it. Just is what it is. Second, the second part of this is to describe the outcome or how you feel about it as a result. And for that, I said, this means we're all going to have to stay late to fix it, so John has it for his meeting first thing tomorrow morning. That is the outcome, and it again is factual. And the third element to this is to suggest a constructive solution to fix the problem. And for that part, I said, why don't you start working on the first part and update that now while I reach out to John and tell him we're running behind schedule, but we're working to get it to him in time for his meeting. And next time, how about we do a review of the reports like this the day before they're due, so it gives us both a little more time. Now, actually, in that last part, not only was there an immediate solution to the immediate problem, but there was also a solution offered for future situations that might come up like this. Okay? So when you approach feedback in this way, you're diffusing the emotions. You're avoiding putting people on the defensive or creating some kind of confrontational circumstance where everyone's trying to save face and it's, all it's doing is damaging the relationship more. When you deliver the feedback in this descriptive way, it's so much more constructive and it's less personal, right? We're taking the personal out of it. We're not commenting on what happened. We're not passing judgment on what happened or who someone is or is not based on their work. We are just stating the facts and staying pretty darn objective. Now, lest you are concerned that this approach won't work for someone who doesn't also understand supportive communication and this descriptive feedback, right? Because I hear this a lot. It's like, well, that's awesome, Alex, but I don't think it's going to work with the person that I want to deliver it to because they don't communicate like that. I hear you, and here's what to do, right? You don't just abandon this approach. You essentially just shift gears and focus on why are they choosing to react so negatively? So, for example, let's say I gave that descriptive feedback as I just described to David, and he says something like this: I don't care, fix it yourself. Or, so what? I don't get what the big deal is. I mean, John can use the report as it is. Those errors aren't really that important. Whoo, breathe. Zen, find your Zen spot. Maybe you'd feel like you want your head to pop off right now if you're greeted with that type of response. I get it. I totally get it. But you don't have to, because here again, you can just go back to your toolbox and use that descriptive approach. But this time, use it for why they're responding the way they are. So for example, you might say something like, David, I'm taken aback that you don't care about this issue. Right? You're describing the situation factually. Your reaction makes me worry about the performance of our team. You're describing the outcome or your feelings. I suggest we take some time to review any concerns you have about us being able to work together to fix this problem. You're suggesting a constructive solution, right? So the point is, if you get mad or start engaging in a back and forth, which, by the way, it is incredibly easy to do in that situation, okay? So let me just, let's be real here for a moment, okay? We've all done that when someone has sort of come back with such a nonchalant answer. However, if you do, it's only going to make it worse, right? It's just going to create more animosity and defensiveness. But if you continue with the calm approach of describing the situation, the outcome or your feelings, and suggesting a solution, you're going to get further faster and likely with a better outcome in the long run, because you're actually nurturing the relationship when you do this, rather than when we get into that confrontation mode, we're damaging the relationship, right? Okay, so that was the third piece of supportive communication, and it's a biggie, right? It's really the heart of all of this. The next one, number 4, is to focus on the problem, not the person, which is kind of already covered in step 3 that we talked about with the descriptive feedback, right? But just to underscore this, the moment you start using the word you when you give negative feedback, the more likely you are to get pushback and defensiveness, right? And I think we all know this, right? It doesn't have to happen at work. You can do this with your spouse, your partner, a friend. The minute you say you did this or you didn't do that, guess what happens? The defense barriers go up, confrontation happens, now you got a conflict on your hands, which you didn't need to have, right? And it's all because of language, because this is a simple fix. So instead of using the word you and thinking as though the person is the problem, think of the situation or event as the problem, right? Because after all, we are not mistakes, right? We are not our own mistakes. We all make mistakes. We've all screwed up a few reports along the way, or worse. I know I have. But those events don't define who we are as human beings, right? Nor do they define the people who work for you. So let's stay focused on the problem, not the person, and try to avoid using the word you when delivering negative feedback. All right, and then finally, the fifth element of supportive communication is to validate rather than invalidate the person you're talking with. Because when we invalidate people, again, we're calling into question their self-worth and we're undermining their confidence, right? And this is, it's not dissimilar to this notion of treating the person as the problem rather than the situation as the problem, right? It's related. So instead of dismissing people with comments like, what you think doesn't matter, or you're wrong about this, you can validate them and make them feel seen and heard by staying respectful. And so if you're using step 3, which was our descriptive communication, then you're on track for this. You can also stay open to the possibility that the other person has something valid to contribute. You can engage in two-way communication where you seek the other person's input or ask them questions, and you can identify areas of agreement. So even if you feel like you might be at loggerheads with someone, there may still be areas where you can both agree, and these become a point of validation and a place from which to build, right? So, and this is where that core of being a positive leader comes in, where you're looking for the good. So we want to validate rather than invalidate people. And we can do that by essentially asking them questions, involving them, seeking common ground, and finding that place from which to build. Okay? So those are the 5 elements to use supportive communication and how to deliver negative feedback in an effective way as a positive leader. So just to recap, the first part, be mindful of the positive to negative statement ratio, right? Remember we said 3 to 5 positive statements for every 1 negative statement. Number 2, be congruent, direct, and honest when you're communicating. Number 3, which is really the heart of all of this, use that descriptive factual approach rather than the judgmental or evaluative approach, right? So state the facts, state the outcome or how this situation makes you feel, state a solution, right? It's those 3 pieces that make up that descriptive factual approach. Number 4, focus on the problem, not the person. And number 5, seek to validate rather than invalidate by being open, respectful, seeking input, and looking for areas of agreement. So there you have it. That's how to deliver negative feedback as a positive leader. Now, obviously this takes a little practice, okay? So pick a few of these elements and practice them with a peer or a colleague. Now, when I'm working with organizations, we do exactly this. We role play some of these situations because it does take a little getting used to communicating in this way, right? It's for most of it, it's not a default way of speaking and communicating, but almost immediately, when we do this, people feel and see the difference this approach makes. It keeps the communication lines open and the relationships intact. And in some cases, it has even strengthened relationships because the person being given the feedback was able to grow and improve in a safe space, right? And we've seen other research on this that especially in teams, one of the crucial elements for people to thrive in teams is having psychological safety, meaning that they feel safe in their team, that if they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world, right? That they can course correct, that they have room to grow and improve. And this, what we're describing here, this supportive communication, how you deliver this negative feedback, is exactly how you can cultivate that type of psychological safety. All right, so thanks for joining me for this week's Positive Leadership Movement episode as we dug deep on how to deliver negative feedback as a positive leader. practice, practice, practice your new skills and techniques now. And join me next week when we're going to talk about how to create a positive culture and overcome resistance to change. So, like all of the episodes on this podcast, this topic is inspired by you, my listeners, and the organizations I work with. And so what I hear all the time is, I hear from leaders all the time is, I want to shift the culture in my organization. I want it to be more positive, but I don't know how. Or maybe, and this happens a lot, previous efforts to shift cultures have been epic failures. Or there are just a lot of people who are resistant to the change. And so if any of that sounds familiar, if you've been trying to shift your culture to be more positive, if you've had culture changes in the past that didn't really work, if you're bumping up against resistance, then you're definitely going to want to tune in next week, because we're going to unpack exactly what it takes to create a truly positive work culture and the incredible advantages this can bring to your organization. Plus, how to overcome those negative Nellies or skeptic Sams who are resistant to what you want to achieve. And we're going to do it all, guess what, in a positive way. All right. So, and of course, if you've got a question about positive leadership, let me know. Send your email to questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com, and I'll answer it in a future episode. For now, this is Alex Bratty signing off and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.